It's a shame that HBO Max is airing these episodes at 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, because I feel like at that time it makes it really hard for all of us to watch at once. I'm sure some of you, that are on the West Coast, you could watch it at, I believe, like midnight, and that wouldn't be a problem. But it's interesting because I feel like it would be more logical for them to just make the show available at a time where everyone could watch it. But I'm going to get into the first 3 episodes of Doom Patrol that aired last night, and there will be spoilers in case you don't want spoilers. If you haven't seen these episodes yet, I recommend coming back later. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing so that you can see upcoming videos as I put them out. So let's get into Doom Patrol. So right off the bat, I really like the character of Dorothy, which we really got to see essentially her introduction in the episode Fun Size Patrol. And I was a little disturbed by the amount of adult behavior that this child actor is getting exposed to. And I get that they can't really change the DNA of the show because there's a child involved now, but I felt like oftentimes the point of these scenes was that the child was being exposed to this behavior. I felt like they were getting mileage out of it, and to me, that's a little bit in poor taste. I felt like, though this character is a wonderful addition, I really like the actress. I feel like she really draws out the emotional aspects of this show, and it's just very touching to see her grappling with all these fears and concerns, and the fact that she basically looks like a monster, and even the members of the Doom Patrol aren't particularly kind about this at times. I love her relationship with Niles. Timothy Dalton here, he is asked to do some pretty silly and ridiculous things, but he doesn't give the sense that he isn't taking this role seriously at all. In fact, it seems like it's something that he's taking very seriously, and he's putting in a lot of effort and doing a great job. And I was reading some old Doom Patrol comics as I prepared to watch this show, and it was amazing to me how much I felt like I could, as I was reading the lines of dialogue, which are just cheesy comic book dialogue. It was funny though how in my head I had his voice, because he has such a distinctive way of portraying Niles, and I definitely felt like he became Niles to me in a sense. This episode obviously is called Fun Size Patrol because the characters are all miniature after the events of last season. I liked the creative use of special effects. I feel like the show doesn't have the biggest budget, but it has an adequate budget, but they use it really, really cleverly to make it seem like it's bigger than it is, and they really maximize what they've been given. And I feel like this episode just had a very fun tone, but I didn't really feel like them being miniature really played that much into the overall themes of the episode. It was a surprisingly sweet episode. I'm kind of surprised they didn't air this on Father's Day, because it had a lot to do with fathers. We have Cliff and his dad, Cliff and his daughter, we have Larry and his 2 sons, and obviously we have the relationship between Niles and Dorothy. So a lot of father and children relationships, and I felt like they added a lot thematically to this episode. I kind of struggled with Cliff's character in these 3 episodes, particularly in this one. I feel like he's always been angry, but here he was almost psychopathic. The way that he was dispatching the rats just seemed like unhealthy behavior. Like, I get that people kill rats in the real world, but when you have them portrayed in the way that they're being portrayed in this show, and that they're essentially bigger than he is at this point, it just seemed kind of unnecessarily brutal. And also on top of that, it just seemed, like I said, psychopathic. And his anger is understandable. I understand why he would react this way to the revelation that Niles instigated the things that happened to these characters that caused them to be in this position. I just felt like it was a little bit too far, a little bit too unlikable, and just he's a little bit too angry. More on that later. This episode also just kind of ended abruptly. There wasn't really a climax. Like, obviously we had the scene where the rats eat the weakest member, the runt of the litter, and that was absolutely disturbing and disgusting, and I didn't like that at all. But it was particularly disturbing because, again, they had Dorothy be the one reacting to it. And I get that it's supposed to be disturbing, but I feel like it just seems like them pushing the envelope a little bit. And, of course, it triggered Dorothy to bring out the imaginary friends in her head. I've heard a lot of people say that these were amazing and that the CGI on them was fantastic. It's fine. I think the designs are pretty good. It's better than it was in the first season, but again, I feel like they're working with a somewhat limited budget, more limited than you might think. And to me, I've seen better CGI on The Witcher and Stranger Things and a lot of other shows, so I wasn't overly impressed with them. They were functional. I like the designs, though. I particularly like the design of the one that is kind of like a bear stag creature. That one looks pretty impressive to me. It was interesting. I was getting ready for, Cliff to fight these creatures or for them to fight the rats or something, but there wasn't really any big fight at the end of this episode, which there doesn't have to be, but there just wasn't really a climax. And because they spent the whole episode trying to get back to normal size, when it happened that, again, Timothy Dalton giving it all in this performance that requires him to do some rather ridiculous things, sings the song, summons Kipling, and decides to trade the talisman to get them all back to their normal size. It just kind of happened abruptly, and I feel like they could have done more to make that seem like the last-ditch decision. Instead, it felt like maybe he jumped to that before he needed to. And obviously, it's a very, very, it raises the stakes because now we have a timeline where Niles will eventually die if nothing changes, but it's kind of one of those things where it's kind of vague in how long can he survive before he dies. And I know that they're going to probably play this out over the season, but I feel like, these episodes lack the unifying effect that Mr. Nobody had in season 1. And I also feel like they kind of lack the fun element that Mr. Nobody brought as a villain. I feel like the meta narrative that he created was entertaining and it kind of set this show apart. And without him here, I feel like it kind of becomes less interesting and the villains become a lot more stereotypical. Which brings me to Time Patrol, the second episode, which the villain is Dr. Time. And the twist is that he's not really a villain. He's just this guy who has he's got this machine that allows him to go around with time. And everybody wants it, and they're all dancing around a skating rink waiting for their opportunity to get it from him, which is the reveal at the end of the episode. They all start killing each other when they think that they can get it from him. But to me, this sequence was simultaneously too crazy and not crazy enough. I felt like the energy was a little low considering that it was like this kind of just bizarre sequence. And it was also just so bizarre, and this show has always been very, very unashamedly nonsensical in the plotting, but here I felt like it was just a little bit lacking in explanation, and I felt like they needed to develop Dr. Time more, spelled with a Y, by the way, just so you know. And just the way that ended, again, was very abrupt with Rita turning back the clock so that Dr. Time didn't die, and then him sending them back without the device. It just felt a little bit abrupt. Cyborg spends this episode in trauma group, and I feel like the design of his character looks better this season. The metal mask actually looks like it is actually part of his body rather than just like a metal mask that he's wearing over his real life head. It actually looks like it's actually embedded where his skull would be. Much better than last season, in my opinion. I didn't like the new character that they introduced, played by Karen Obolum. I feel like Joivan Wade is doing a better job this season as an actor, which just goes to show, I think, that actors can grow even if they start out as weak actors, which I personally think he did, and I know a lot of people feel like he's ruining this show. I wouldn't go so far. I feel like the character helps the show, but I feel like the actor he needs to grow in his acting ability. And I do see some growth here. I feel like he created some decent chemistry with Rita in the first episode, but he has absolutely no chemistry with Karen Obolum. I like this relationship. I think that there are some positive messages about self-acceptance in this relationship, but I wasn't overly impressed with their chemistry, as I said. And I felt like her character was a little bit too try-hard. Like, I think they're trying to make her this strong woman and to not allow Cyborg to, basically dominate her the way that a male character often would in a relationship in a TV show. But I feel like they just have made her a little bit grating and unlikable in the way that they have portrayed her. And there are ways to make a female character strong and relatable without making her this grating. I feel like this episode also struggled, particularly this episode. I think this show has always had this problem, but this episode in particular struggled with bathos, which is when humor undercuts dramatic moments. And I felt like there was a great example of this when Larry finds out that one of his sons has died, and he heads off to go and investigate and attend the funeral, and he reconnects with his other son in what was a very, very touching sequence. But the thing was, right after he finds out his son has died, his other son has died, and obviously Cliff is in a very bad place this season, but he cracks this joke, and it just was like, it was too far, I felt like. And I kind of get the point. It's kind of the point that he is going too far with making fun of people's pain and such, but I felt like there was a lot of scenes like that that undercut dramatic moments in this episode in particular. I liked the cliffhanger at the end of Time Patrol with Larry and the butterflies. I thought that was kind of chilling, and if this had been an episode that was a weekly episode where we didn't have the next episode to watch right away, I would have been really, really anxious for the next episode. But we got to watch the next episode immediately, and that was Pain Patrol. And it's kind of funny, I feel like this whole show should kind of be called Pain Patrol because it's all about these characters' torment. And I think that was kind of rammed home in this episode, and how we saw that Larry talked to Rita about how he had always admired her as an actress because she always seemed to have this underlying pain in her performances. And I feel like all these characters have this underlying pain, and I felt like it was really interesting. This episode, and I hate to say this because I hate to be like, well, the one episode that I thought had the best villain was the one where they had a more traditional villain, as opposed to the first two episodes where they tried to be more creative and not go the stereotypical villain route. But I definitely thought that this was the best villain. And the way that Red Jack was introduced at the beginning, showing up as Jack the Ripper, it was really, really chilling. I think the character design is fantastic. I think he looks frightening. I guess they killed him off this episode, and it felt a little bit anticlimactic the way that they did it, but I would actually like to see more of this villain because I found him pretty intense and frightening. Now, he is just kind of a underdeveloped character. Again, I felt like all the villains have been a little bit undercooked this season since they don't have Mr. Nobody, who was the best villain this show has been able to conjure so far, and I think this show is lacking a little bit without him. But I felt that this episode, this villain was stronger than previous villains have been, and I think that this episode was the most thematically consistent and the most thematically well-developed, because they went into each character's personal torment and what that means to them. And it was really fitting that they have this villain in Red Jack that thrives on people's pain, because that really suits these characters who are driven by their pain to some extent. And I liked the extra dimensional palace. I thought that there was a good set design there. I liked the concept of him kind of keeping all his victims as butterflies that the characters were eventually able to free. I liked the sequences with Cyborg and Ronnie this episode more than I liked them in the second episode. I felt like they did a better job investigating how each of these characters is really damaged. But I liked how they didn't make it a cliche, how they had Ronnie very accepting of her scars, that she wasn't afraid to show herself to Cyborg, and how that kind of gave him the courage to show himself to her, metal abs and all. I liked that they showed us Larry and Rita in the earlier stages of their relationship, and I thought it was fascinating how Larry is this character who is tortured by Red Jack by having him cause these other people pain because they're being exposed to his radiation, which we discover the bandages are protecting people from, and that is a gift to him from Niles Calder. And I think it's fascinating and really a good contrast between Red Jack and the other characters, that it's torture for the other characters that Larry is being tortured, and it's torture for Larry that he's causing these other people to die because of the radiation. It really strikes a good contrast between him and the villain. I did feel like Timothy Dalton acted the heck out of this episode. I really thought he did a great job in his scenes with Red Jack, and just his horrified reactions really sold the drama of those scenes. I did feel that Red Jack's death, as I said, was anticlimactic, and I felt like there should have been more to it. I liked that his reaction to his own pain was kind of like, oh, so this is what it feels like, and he kind of almost seemed to be enjoying the finality of death, which was very Freudian in a way. I really did not like, I hate the Underground. I'm sorry for those of you who like it, but I've always thought that this concept, it kind of reminds me of Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, where they're adding too much order and organization to a concept that really should just be chaotic and more like a dream state. I feel like the idea that they're sitting around in a group meeting trying to decide who will be the primary and telling Jane that she has to go along with what they want, or they're going to lock her up and, keep her contained and make someone else the primary personality. I just feel like this feels like a very, very dull and rigid way to engage with this concept, and I would rather that they kind of embraced the zaniness of it a bit more. I liked that Niles, as the episode went on, I felt like they sidelined Dorothy in the second and third episodes, but I liked how the conclusion brought her into Niles's arc, where he realizes, you know what, it's not enough just to apologize to Cliff. I have to try and make it right to him. And we get to see him, working on the design for Robot Man 2.0. And it's going to be interesting to see what this design looks like. I'm not as well acquainted with the comics as some of you are. I have read some of them, but let me know if you know what this design is going to be. I'd be interested to hear about that. Again, I feel like Cliff this episode was a little too angry, a little bit too psychopathic. I feel like I get it. Like, there's no baseline for knowing what he's dealing with. Like, he's in a very, very hard position that is just not possible. Like, we will never experience what he's going through, so I get that. But like the scene with the police officers where he starts smashing his own bus, it's just, his behavior is so irrational. It's hard to imagine any human being acting this way, especially one that's technically only a brain in a robot's body. Like, he doesn't have all the hormones and the other issues that we would theoretically have that would cause us to have more emotions. So it's kind of funny that he's the most emotional character in the group. So I really enjoyed these 3 episodes. I don't think this show is quite as good as a lot of people say it is, but I do think it's very enjoyable, and I think it's a pleasant change of pace from a lot of the other superhero shows. I think that they understand the concept from the comics, which is that these characters are not enjoying being superheroes. I feel like so often when we see superhero stories, they're like, oh, I'm not happy, this is miserable, but we just don't really believe it because they're Superman or they're Batman or they're whoever. But these characters, it's like, no, we genuinely feel that these characters probably are pretty miserable in their state of affairs, and it's interesting watching them grapple with that and struggle to find a sense of purpose. And I like that their battles are not traditional battles and that they're more emotionally driven. So those are my thoughts on the first 3 episodes of Doom Patrol. I'm going to be doing spoiler reviews on a weekly basis as more episodes release. Hopefully I'll get them out Thursday morning on a future basis. This week has been really a challenge for me, but if you're enjoying what I'm doing, please consider subscribing to the channel, and as always, you can watch more videos right now.